Are you a fan of the Iron Sysadmin podcast? If you are, don't forget you can support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/ironsysadmin. Or you can buy merchandise at teespring.com/stores/ironsysadmin. And thank you. News, ops, and a little bit of paranoia. Welcome to the Iron Sysadmin Podcast.
Welcome to tonight's show, everybody. I'm your host, Nate, and I'm joined by all manner of people tonight. So say hi to Jason and Uncle Mark and our special guest, Corbin.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Take turns.
Greetings.
A week or so ago, I was listening to Pulse Security Weekly, and someone that we know was on the show. They said that our intro music was horrible. Was that the word he used? Terrible, horrible, scary? I forget what it was.
Yeah, something along those lines.
I heartily disagree, and I called them out on Twitter for it, but no one responded to me. I guess we're not a big enough fish.
And that was followed up by Paul saying that we should be on their show. So
I don't know if he was talking about us or the other show they were talking about, because they were talking about shows with bad intro music.
Talking about us, damn it.
Okay, totally. We should call him out on that too.
Our intro music?
Nothing.
It kicks all sorts of ass.
Our intro music is awesome. In fact, I'm going to play it again. No, I won't play it again.
Play it again. Well, maybe some bars of it.
Fun fact, all the pieces of the intro music, the transition music, and the close music are all part of the same song. I just clipped them out because they were different pieces. I thought that would tie the show together well.
It's a Creative Commons song, isn't it?
It is a Creative Commons song. It's in the show notes. It is. I forget the name of it already.
Nobody reads those.
It's
reads the show notes.
It's by a group called Tritachyon, and The group is Digital MK2. The song is Tritachyon, or it's the other way around. I forget now. Tritachyon is the group.
The Big Lebowski.
Tritachyon is the group.
Together.
Digital MK2 is the song. And it is a Creative Commons song. However, I have to share that along with the song. Otherwise, I'm breaking their thing. And you know what? It's a good song. I want to bring attention to Tritachyon. They're good. They have some other good songs too. They're just not featured in the show. Anyway, we're not here to talk about music. We're here to talk about, well, in general, we're going to talk about AI and the ethics around it. But the reason that we're talking about it is because back in June, the night that I spilled a beer on the mixer, we were going to talk about this because it was in the news. There's I guess, an engineer at Google whose job it was. He worked in their responsible AI project. Part of his job was to discern whether AI may have gained sentience. So they actually have people at Google that try to interact with their AIs and say, I think this thing actually has an intellect behind it, instead of this is just a program response, right? And he thought he'd found one of their AIs. They call it, I don't want to mispronounce this. Jason thinks it's LaMDA. It could also be Lambda, but Lambda is a name of a function service on Amazon, so that could get confusing. You could also just say it's LaMDA. I'm not sure, but it's a thing at Google, and it's a chatbot that's supposed to be used to make like customer service bots and whatever feel more like actual people, right? So the thing is designed to feel like a person, and it's designed by a company like Google that has put a ton of research and whatnot into AI. So of course the thing is going to feel like a person. Well, he went to the Washington Post. And, well, I guess he didn't go directly to the Washington Post. He went to some folks at Google saying, I think this thing has gained sentience. They told him he was wrong, or maybe that he was insane. I'm not sure. I don't know what the conversation looked like at Google. So he went to the Washington Post with it. And, I mean, argue whether he should have done that or not, I don't know. I guess if you feel like people above you aren't listening, this is a thing that people do nowadays. They go to the public. And he subsequently got fired over it. Now, I'm not here to argue whether the man should have been fired or not. What it brings to mind for me is this exact discussion of, well, robots and AIs. This is like science fiction here, or at least it was 10 or 15 years ago, where the computers are all of a sudden intelligent and make decisions for themselves, right? So the reason we brought Corbin on is because he's got, well, his own words, he has an unhealthy interest in AI. So I thought we would all just have a discussion around basically AI, where the industry seems like it's going. I'm not an AI pro, right? I'm familiar with it. I know what it's all about. I don't think Jason or Mark are either, but I'll let you guys speak for yourself. And Corbin is basically a hobbyist, right? So we're not going to claim to be AI experts here, but I just thought it'd be fun to talk about, right? So, yeah, the computers, they're going to rule the world. What do you guys think?
Hey, I typed the Eliza program in from the Basic Computer Games book in the late 70s on my Apple, and Eliza sure seemed like she could talk to you, but,
Yeah, so that's kind of the thing, right? I guess how do you know? How can you tell if a program is just a really good program, like especially a program that is designed to seem like it's giving you a human response to something, versus how do you know if it actually seems to have an, for lack of a better word, soul? Anybody?
AI Junior over there, shouldn't you be talking on this now?
Speak.
Like, AI philosophy is very hard. I don't know. I'm not wholly convinced that we can define consciousness as it is. And in Blake, like the guy who stood up about all the things, his name's Blake Lemoine. When he first stood up about it, he's changed his story a few times, and it's kind of confusing. So he went from, oh my god, it's sentient, to oh well, Google wouldn't let me do the things I wanted to do, and that's why I needed to stand up, to like, what was the most recent one? We just mentioned it.
Yeah, I was going to
Um,
talk about that at the end, but you can certainly jump to it now. Feel free.
he's just he's changed his story a lot of times, and one of the things he pushed really hard on was like Google wouldn't let us define a scientific framework to measure consciousness, basically. Like he stood up and down, jumped around, and was like, we can't make a way to quantify this. And I don't know if I believe that, because it's Google, so it's kind of a black box, but like I'm also not sure how one would define consciousness. As any form of AI at the moment seems, like Lambda is not sentient. It is a chatbot. It is a narrow AI. It can only do one thing, and that is talk. And that's with, like, I think 512 billion training sets and like teraflops upon teraflops of compute power and all of these things just to be able to make intelligible sentences. It's not sentient.
But what about the Turing test?
Turing test is kind of a mute point at this point.
Yeah, wasn't that supposed to be
Like-
the thing, right? Oh, if you can pass
Like,
the Turing test,
we
yeah.
managed to mimic human speech, but like sentience is so much more than can I talk back to you in normal sentences. Like the babies can do it. Apparently,
I mean, sentience is
sign language.
Part of sentience is can you make up your own, like, do you have your own opinions? Can you be creative? That sort of thing. But trying to define what that is difficult, especially when you have billions of training sets, because trying to figure out if you created something on your own or you just kind of took. So I guess, for instance, if an AI comes up with a quote unquote new idea by just taking a couple of ideas that it saw in its training set and mushing them together, does that make it sentient? Is that actually a new idea? Because that's what humans do.
My
Yeah,
English
so, like-
teacher would say that synthesizing stuff like that together and writing an essay, that would absolutely qualify.
Then computers have been sentient for years.
Right. So I
Right,
guess
but-
that's kind of the question, right? What defines sentience versus really creative coding? Right?
And this argument of taking things and kind of smashing them together and making something new is actually a pretty big topic now with the various different visual bots or visual AIs that they're dealing with now. I don't remember what the couple of them are called, but you type in a picture of a dog playing with a kitten on Mars, and it kicks out a bunch of pictures of things mashed together that kind of look like that.
So, like, the interesting thing about those, so there are lots of different kind of neural networks that like are used for AI. The visual ones are really interesting because they're what I specialized in when I did research, and so they're generally speaking usually what are called compositional pattern producing neural networks. They just really like latching onto patterns and then repeating them like millions of times. So you give it a ton of dogs and then it says, oh, I think this is what a dog looks like. And then when you type in some, like, I don't know, hot dog, and it makes a dog out of hot dogs and it's really funny, it's because it wanted to make the shape of a dog with a bunch of hot dogs that it already knew what they were. Like, it's just smashing together a bunch of old data, but it doesn't, like, Blake Lemoine was like, oh, well, based on my religious and beliefs, like, it has a soul when he was talking about Lambda. It doesn't seem like it does. Like, it's not unique. You type in things and you get the exact same response every time because it's pre-trained for that. It's not dynamic. Like, it's not constantly changing.
So
now you could throw a feedback loop in there somewhere, but
by
like, it's
by that argument, right? So if I ask you what 2 times 2 is, you're going to tell me 4, right? Because
I would hope so.
well, right, because it's the right answer, but it's also I've given you input, you give me the same response, right? So trained response like that doesn't necessarily mean you're not sentient, but it also doesn't mean you are, right? Does that make sense? I don't know if maybe that's too shallow for the conversation that you're having.
Are you pushing towards like a gray area kind of argument?
Well, my point is, I think that gray area might be a good argument here, right? It's really difficult to tell if something is truly sentient without, or I should say, quote unquote, has a soul, without attaching um, like
Yep.
theology to it. You know what I mean?
Now, hang on, no, but hang on a second. If we're going to start throwing words around, are you saying that sentience and possessing the theological construct that we call a soul are the same thing?
I think that's what Blake Lemoine was suggesting, isn't it?
I'm fairly sure from reading a lot of his things.
Yeah.
All right. So those of us who have pets,
Hmm.
you have dogs, you have cats, would you consider those animals sentient? Like, what does sentient actually mean?
I always took it to mean that you have free will. No?
I'm not sure free will is an argument that we want to start to have.
Well, no, I just
Well,
mean
okay,
if you
so-
ask me
We
what
can
does
turn Iron Sysadmin into a philosophy podcast.
yeah, right.
but, like,
Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, this is gonna border on philosophy. I think is what this
Right.
was what it comes down to,
So-
right?
so
But
let's
that's
back
my
up.
point, right? So if you ask me what do I think sentience is, it's not how smart are you, it's not how well you can respond to things, it's whether you have free will or not, isn't it? I mean, certainly you can argue like what free will is all you want, but like as humans understand free will, the ability to make choices, right? That
Does your
would
dog have free will?
I would say the dog has
My-
free will. The dog
My
can
dog runs
choose
away whenever the hell it wants to, so yes.
the dog can choose
Right.
to eat my slippers, or it can choose to listen to what I've told it to do and not eat my slippers, right? But that's
Right.
that just means that I'm in control of the thing that has free will, right? It still has free will.
So I'm gonna slot Corbin into the academic role, right? Because I think that's what you really are tonight, right?
sure.
So, do you have an accepted academic definition of what sentience is?
Not personally.
Okay.
I'm
Is-
sure you could.
I guess is there one? Is the next question. I don't know. Maybe we should have looked this up. Research.
We could look sentience up in the dictionary, but
Just don't ask
If
Google.
you start at the beginning, can we assume that AI actually is a reality? Like, what would be your definition of an AI, Corbin?
So I think it would be any kind of structure that very closely mimics or exceeds human mental capabilities. Like our current networks are basically bordering on trying to create actual functioning neurons that can do multiple things, the same way that a human brain works. Now, it takes entire data centers to do that, whereas the human brain is a small thing inside my head. But like,
Yeah, a couple of pounds of bacon fat. But so
Does
but
it
can
does
we-
it taste like bacon?
Would you say, if you have to give a binary answer, would
don't
you
wanna
say
know,
that
Nate.
AI is a reality at this point?
I
Have
would
we
not
actually
say-
created artificial intelligence?
It depends on your definition of AI,
Yeah, that's the scary part, right? Who's defining
Well,
it?
this
which
podcast with
which
Bill
is a
Clinton.
huge problem. So, like, if
And
you
I'm not-
define
and-
if you define AI as a fully sentient, we've reached the apex, then no, we're nowhere near it. If you define
Yeah, and-
AI as something that can complete a task given to it within whatever training, it needs to do that task and not expected to be able to handle other things, then yeah, we have AI that runs all over the place.
Right, and I'm not trying to trick anybody or whatever. The way I'm thinking about it is you're going to have progressive levels. Like, you can write an if-then statement that can make a simple decision based on specific input.
Mhm.
And my understanding of AI is it is a programmed system that has the ability to synthesize new decisions based on rule sets, but it's not just doing a bunch of if-thens to get to a predetermined path.
Right. The difference between
So,
an
like-
if then and an AI is that there's not an if then behind it. right?
Yeah, but if you start thinking about it this way, you hit the fun little thought that like you can abstract things so far that if then statements can be any kind of consciousness that we are currently aware of. Like you
True.
can set up like four-dimensional hyperplanes support vector machines and all sorts of fancy stuff, and they're just if then statements stacked on top of each other. Any kind of thing you can talk about statistically can just be a set of if then statements stacked on top of each other. So it's not exactly useful to think about it that way.
So how is it useful to think about it?
I like to think about it more qualitatively because that's exactly what consciousness is. Humans are not quantitative by nature. Like we are in a sense, but like we're also squishy flesh bags in meat space. So like, you know, who cares if we're measuring the amount of neurons in our head versus the amount of like nodes in a neural network? Like it doesn't matter that much outside of the capabilities and the loose definition of how things function.
So AI then
Like,
is more about capability than technology. Is that what you're saying?
yep. It's why I also think that current approaches to AI are really, really redundant. Things like to hit a ceiling in AI, especially since projects like GPT-3, Palm, DeepMind, like they're just hitting a ceiling where they keep throwing data set after data set after data set at things to just refine it more and more, but it's not improving. It's just the law of diminishing returns.
So when you say
I
it's
think
not,
learning in the AI space is very different from how a human learns. So in order for an AI to learn, you're going to throw just ridiculous amounts of data at it, you know, more than any human really will ingest in their lifetime. And at the end of it, you're going to have an AI that is still as dumb as a rock. It might be able to do one or two interesting things, and you know, it's kind of a
well,
neat concept, but
it, it
it can't come anywhere near what a human can do.
well this comes down to the like what do you consider dumb as a rock, right? So it's like the old argument, right? There's a bunch of very smart people in this world that aren't very wise, right? So does that make them dumb
Yeah.
as a rock? Because
So
that's kind of
so
AI, right? If you throw all of the human knowledge into an AI, it can answer any question it wants. It's not dumb, quote
well,
unquote. It knows a bunch of things.
yeah. Well, I
Doesn't
don't.
know how to apply
But
them.
even no. But even if you've thrown all of human knowledge at an AI, it can't necessarily answer all the questions. It can answer the questions if the ingested data had answers to those questions in it. But making answers for questions that weren't already in there, that's like a next level thing. Sometimes it can infer things, but it doesn't. The AIs that I mean, I haven't done as much as what Corbin's done, but you know, the AIs that I've seen can do a lot of inference, but they can't really come up with new concepts. They can't really come up with new ideas and that sort of thing. And by dumb as a rock, I mean take a newborn, right? By, you know, 2 years old, that newborn can do things like that no AI could ever do. You know, walking and babbling and talking and pointing things out and just figuring stuff out on its own.
Right.
AIs
Yes.
AIs that have been fed like, you know, terabytes and petabytes of data can't do that.
Yeah, so Google's Lambda was fed on 137 billion parameters, and it can only talk. And even then, if you talk to it, it does not make sense sometimes. It's impressive for what it is. But I have great concern about bias and like actual inequality in data sets and like so many other safety things with AI that wondering whether or not it's conscious, like it's not a concern outside of how AI can actually just damage real life if it's misused. Like whether or not it's sentient doesn't really matter if you're using it to harm people.
There's a lot of sentient creatures out there that still harm people. And I think that's the fear, right? We've seen this in science fiction movies over and over again. We saw it in The Fifth Element, right? Lilu learns all about the history of the world, and as soon as she learns about war, all of a sudden she decides humans aren't worth saving, right? Or, you know, the robots from the Matrix, or, you know, rinse and repeat all of the quote unquote artificial intelligences that all of a sudden decided humans weren't worth the meat they're made out of.
Skynet, baby.
Right, right. There you go. The Terminator, right?
Our
you know,
fate was decided in seconds once Skynet became self-aware.
Skynet became self-aware, right? And then it's like, oh, these humans, they suck. So, which actually brings us to this fun. I don't know which one of you put this in here, but it's perfectly timed because it came out around the same time as this article about Blake Lemoine, this chess robot that broke a boy's finger. I remember hearing about this on like the normal average everyday mundane news that a robot broke a boy's finger. This kid was playing chess against the robot, and now, you know, the robot, I think, was reaching for a piece. The robot couldn't tell that the thing it grabbed was the kid's finger, and it just like snapped the kid's finger, right? And a lot of people were, yeah, maybe with no real data, were, oh, have the robots turned on us because they broke this boy's finger?
This
I
is
think
why
it
we
would
should
be-
like build error checking into things.
Maybe the chess robot needs a better
Standard
camera.
practice.
I don't know. To me, that was the digital equivalent of catching your hand in the car door.
Right.
What the boy,
Yeah,
boy
like-
did is he grabbed for his piece before the robot was done cycling out of its
Right.
move.
Right.
The
Right.
kid got impatient. He fucked around and found out.
Yeah. So
know.
I played competitive chess. He broke a chess rule. I'm sorry, that's the consequences.
the consequences,
There
they
you
broke
go.
your finger.
Well,
Yeah, man, Mr. Hill was really brutal to me in high school.
Yeah. So anyway, that I honestly, I think that's more or less included out of in jest. There's nobody really thinks that the chess robot is trying to take out humanity.
dude.
No, there are a lot of
there are people who think the robot attacked the kid.
Okay,
guarantee it.
you're probably right. There's people that think the robot attacked the kid because they don't really understand what the robot is programmed to do.
no. There are a lot of roboticists and engineers who looked at that and said, you know, there should be limit switches and everything else in that built into that robot, especially since it's running around people, and you know clearly they weren't there because it broke the kid's finger.
Yeah, my question is:
any
does a robotic hand need that much pressure to pick up a chess piece that it can break someone's finger? Come on,
Wasn't the robot
It
built
was-
by Russians? I mean, like, pretty
it's a
Yeah.
Russian robot.
Oh, God
it-
damn
the
it.
whole the robot was a gimmick to begin with, and I don't know if it was the pressure of the pincher closing
the
on the
angle.
finger. I think it was the lateral movement
Yeah.
as the robot was trying to pick up and move the piece,
Oh, okay.
and I'm sure the kid fought back a little.
It
You
catches
think?
the weak little child. So he was a chess player. He's weak.
Hey, maybe weak. Hey, the child's got weak bones.
And the Russians, they like the MiG. It was basically like just build a bigger and bigger engine on the airframe until it flies by brute force. So, brute force chess robot, man.
Oh my gosh. Till it flies by brute force. Is that really how they designed the MiG fighter jet?
That's the exaggeration.
Just put a giant engine on a stick. Make the stick fly.
So there's always some technology things that really push ethical questions, and you've already sort of touched upon that a little bit. And AI, more than most comp sci things, seems to bring out these ethical questions. You know, we've touched upon the whole idea of, can an AI, if it becomes sentient, you know, would it have rights? I mean, that's in the outline right here. Is that how would
Yeah.
you even measure that?
Yeah, I
Like,
was just-
how would you know?
I was just thinking the same thing. Like, let's say we could magically say, this laptop over here, sentient. It's got a soul. What does that mean? What
I
what
would
now?
think Sentient and soul are not equivalent, but that's the.
Well, whatever. I'm saying, right? So sentient, does sentient mean it has rights? Does a soul mean it has rights? Right? Are they the same thing? Are they not the same thing? Like, these are questions I don't know if we have answers to. We'll use the word sentience to make it simple.
They're not
right?
the same thing.
If my laptop is sentient, I've written an awesome piece of software, somehow it runs on my laptop. I know we're hand waving a lot here. it's now sentient. We've decided it's sentient. What does that mean for my laptop? Do I have to give it citizenship? Do I have to give it rights? Do I have to let it make its own choices and go out into the world and be prosperous? Or is it still just my laptop? Nothing?
It's a hard question.
Right.
I mean, it entirely depends on the behavior of it, I think. So, like, the entire goal of humanity as a species is self-preservation. We touch on Rocco's basilisk a little bit here. Sorry for anyone who looks that up. I just screwed you over. But, like, if it were to pose a risk to humanity, I could understand why somebody would turn it off. I also am not entirely convinced that AI would just magically pose a risk to humanity.
But all the science fiction said it will. Science fiction was right about these things, these smartphones. So that means they're obviously right about other things, right?
Let's pretend. Let's put the actual the existence of this is a danger to humanity. Let's put that to the side. Are we, if Nate's laptop has gone sentient, number 5 alive?
Yes.
Are we now morally obligated to provide it access to power, to change its battery without shutting it off? Because if the laptop reboots or shuts down, it snuffs out the sentient aspect of it. Like, do we have a moral obligation to maintain that sentience that we've somehow sparked into being as long as we possibly can?
I don't know.
Or on the other side, right? So this is, say it's sentient, if you want to call it life, right? Everything has a lifespan. My dog has a different lifespan than a human, like average lifespan. Obviously, accidents happen, but in the perfect conditions, no illness, no cancer, whatever, a human has a certain lifespan, roughly 100 years. I don't know what the actual lifespan as a human is nowadays, but, we all expect to live to our 80s or 90s. A dog, you might get 15 to 20. A cat might be 20 to 30, I've heard of for cats, right? A hermit crab, I recently looked this up. Hermit crabs can live 30 years. Maybe the lifespan of an AI is not infinite. Maybe it's as long as the battery lasts.
Lifespan is a reboot.
Yeah, maybe it's the next time the machine reboots. That's the lifespan.
But
right?
Well, but how does
updates?
Yeah,
why
right.
does lifespan come into it?
Well, because
Why does lifespan come into it at all?
Because
I mean,
it's if you think about this again, we're getting back to philosophy here, right? It's wrong to kill something. It's wrong to kill a person. It's wrong to kill a thing.
I mean,
well, that's what I mean. That's my point. That's my point.
We didn't touch on this in Sentience, but it might not have feelings.
Right. It may not be quote unquote alive in the first place.
And that's also an instrumental. Go on.
There are humans that don't have feelings, and killing them is still wrong.
You're right. There's humans we think might deserve to die, and it's still wrong to kill them. Whether they're monsters or just complete morons, whatever, right? Sometimes we feel like that thing needs to die.
Let's avoid that topic. If we look at the majority of science fiction that says, "Oh my God, AI is going to kill us," it's usually killing us out of fear or anger.
Yeah. Well, that's generally why you kill anything. Or, psychopath.
What if it doesn't feel those emotions? Is it still sentient? Is it not sentient until we've made it want to kill us?
Again, there are humans that don't have they don't have emotions. I mean, it's kind of a known thing. Are they sentient? So we consider them still to be sentient. I mean, so I don't know that emotion comes into it either.
Star Trek set the precedence that emotions are very important. From
I didn't say they weren't important. Yep, I didn't say they weren't important, but they don't.
To a machine, I mean, right? Like that was his quest. The whole freaking series was like, oh, I don't have any emotions. I wish I had emotions.
The existence of emotions, right? But the existence of emotions doesn't define, or isn't even. I wouldn't even put in the definition of sentience.
So
I don't know what my definition would be, but
I'm gonna throw some real table stakes down because my oldest daughter is high functioning autistic. Her brain is just wired different, where she is terrible at reading social cues, and she doesn't always emotionally react like an air quote normal person would.
But she still has emotions.
Absolutely sentient. Yeah, she has emotions, but they're not always appropriate, and they're not always expressed like other people would express them.
Yeah. I'm
But
not arguing.
I don't
that,
I don't
like,
tie emotions and sentience necessarily together, though.
So maybe
I
we
think
have
the
to have
interesting-
a follow up to this show that has a priest and a philosopher and a theologian and I don't know, some scientist. What sort of scientist would cover this?
Geologist.
Geologist? It's not a
I'm
rock.
gonna grab my professional when semester starts. Don't worry.
I think the more interesting question about that to your question mark about whether you have to keep it powered on or whether you're allowed to reboot it or all of that is if a machine has become sentient and you turn it off and it retains all state, just assume that all state is retained, and you turn it back on, will it still be sentient? Is it the programming that made it sentient, or was it something else that we just don't understand? I mean, there's been a couple of really good little sci-fi stories
Yeah.
that sort of encompass this, where
what was it?
you turn it off and turn it on again, and suddenly it's
Yeah.
just a computer.
Yeah, there was. God, which one was it? I remember one recently where it was just that. It was like there was some sort of a quote unquote glitch that made the thing quote unquote sentient or alive, right? And having been rebooted, it came back without that, right?
So
Sad ending, right? But but yeah, I've seen that trope before.
I know what you're talking about. I don't remember the name of it. This touches on like a whole field of philosophy where we try to define like consciousness as like different parts of the brain, or maybe like the electrical signals in the brain create consciousness, and it hits like modern medicine and all sorts of things where like, how do we define resuscitation and life after you die? And then you get to talk about brain transplants and all sorts of really weird stuff.
I mean, there's some people that have
This rabbit hole
suggested
just goes down and down and down, and I've been down it.
there's some people that
Right.
have suggested that when you sleep is almost like, that level of unconsciousness is almost like a, not quite death and rebirth, but like I've heard that theory before but I think in that situation, your brain is never really off. Otherwise we wouldn't be dreaming and things, right? So anyway.
I don't know. Sometimes after long trips, I go completely comatose.
There you go.
It was Wally,
Yeah,
I think,
so-
that I'm thinking of now, by the way. Wally.
So we talk about software, right? And is human consciousness software? There's a Black Mirror episode where old people, before they die, they get their consciousness uploaded into basically the cloud, and they get to hang out in these resorts for all eternity as a computer program. Is that really them, or is that just a copy of them?
Right.
There's that Amazon comedy download, where it's the same thing. Like, and I've wrestled with this myself. Like, if you took me and copied me up into the cloud, would the I sitting here right now, be aware of that, or would it just be a copy of me that could react like me, and one of you talking to Uncle Mark after death would think I was there, but it wouldn't necessarily be the me that's sitting here right here inside of my head?
Well, this again, I think, comes back.
That even makes sense.
Well, no, it makes
and-
perfect sense, right? But it comes back to a theology and philosophy discussion that
Right.
I don't know that any of us here are qualified to have. we can certainly talk about it, though. It wouldn't be the first time we're talking about stuff we're not qualified to talk about.
if you want a really
But-
amusing insight to that side of like philosophy, I'm not joking when I say that Portal 2 has genuine like really good wit on this entire subject because of how they like upload a person's brain into a potato and like run it throughout the game as a running joke. It's
Yeah.
an entire thing in the game, and some of the ways that they approach it and talk about it are really fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I think the theologian would just simply say that the copy can't be real because you can't transfer a soul. And
Right.
the philosopher would make a lot of babble and come out with a relatively benign answer.
Yeah.
That, let you come to your own conclusion.
But this is relevant because
yeah.
In a similar way, it's how, like, if you get the code good enough.
Yeah.
Talking Corbin about how you could reduce everything to if-then statements. If you get a complex enough pile of if-then statements, you're emulating my behavior inside of a machine. Like, how do you? That's where we really come to the inflection.
The
point
answer could be completely ambiguous. We could duplicate you into a machine and ask you, "Hey, are you, still you?" And of course you'd say yes. We would never know how to tell.
Well, right, exactly, and I think that's the point, right? So, assuming that we could somehow take our consciousness and turn it into a program, right? And put that program into a machine. That's really an exact parallel to, can we create a consciousness in a machine? And is that consciousness really a consciousness?
The current state of AI is basically like a small child that just wants to run amok. Like, it just wants to run around and break things really fast. Yeah, just like you, Mark. It wants to run around and break things really fast and, like, smack its way through with no regard. Like, it has no outer senses outside of its narrow path. Like, it's literally narrow AI at the moment, or narrow machine learning. Like, yeah, I think we could definitely create true consciousness on a computer. Maybe. But, like, do we even have enough silicon in the world to create that amount of compute power needed? Who knows? Like, there are so many upper boundaries here that we don't know.
It may just take breakthroughs in how we do it. I mean, maybe we move away from silicon and we move to more meat space applications. But look, the human brain does it, apparently. So, if we can mimic that somehow create a BioWare style brain and then program it, we could create that. But the underlying question of
terrifying thing that people do. It's really interesting.
The underlying question of whether or not that's actually sentience is still there, though, because today we define the question of if I take Uncle Mark and I clone his brain into a computer, is that cloned brain still sentient? If your answer is no, I mean, in my opinion, then sentience is defined by being a human or being a meat puppet of some sort, whether you're a dog, a cat, whatever.
Right.
If you then create a meat space brain and copy Uncle Mark's consciousness to it, and then say, is that sentient? And you say no, then I think our definition of sentience doesn't make any sense, because you've taken those things out of there.
Yeah, and
I think you're more on the theological side, where you're saying,
that's just what I was going to say. I think this is going to come down to
Uncle Mark. Yeah, Uncle Mark is sentient because he has a soul, even though nobody knows what the hell that is.
Right.
Oh, he
and the copy of Uncle Mark isn't sentient because it doesn't have a soul, but it can still sing annoying songs. So, it's still Uncle Mark.
Absolutely.
But what if I transferred my soul into a mayonnaise jar and sold it on eBay? You guys remember that? That happened. That was a thing someone did.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, I would say theologians can tell you that you can't transfer your soul. So.
Right. It's certainly not into a mayonnaise jar.
Unless it's to the devil. You can sell your soul to the devil. But other than that, you can't transfer it anywhere.
Well, that isn't transferring it. That's just selling ownership of it.
Well, there's that piece that say that you sold your soul to the devil and you've lost it and it's gone now.
Guys,
you don't have a soul anymore. So it had to get transferred.
Science fiction horror story. It's thousands of years in the future. We're selling souls for AI as NFTs.
Oh, you just lost us. Sorry, Corbin. We're going to kick you out now.
That's a horror movie.
It's deserved.
Only if you're selling them on Web3.
All right. So, I don't know. We could
by that point.
We could go on for an hour. We have gone on for almost an hour about this. We go on for several hours, I think, and not really come to a conclusion here because, again, we're not I don't know if humanity has an answer to this yet, right? So really, the point was just to talk about it, right?
No.
And hopefully, hopefully our
There is-
voices contribute to the conversation some.
Yeah, and there is one more link that's in the show notes that I wanted to point out. There's
Yeah.
a TED talk that I watched the other day in there. And the lady that's talking is some sort of a English major or something. She writes books and stuff. Very, very, very intelligent speaker. The talk was incredible, and her concept is more that artificial intelligence is sort of not where we should be going anyway. We need to be going to what she calls it alternative intelligence, and it's more so why would create an artificial intelligence to do these things instead of we have our phones and we use that to augment our own intelligence, and she considers that to be more of an alternative intelligence, and that's sort of the path forward. And it's a really good talk, and it's worth listening to.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that, and maybe this is just my own experiences getting in the way, my own upbringing, my own beliefs, whatever, right? And everyone's going to have their own opinion on this. I feel like trying to reinvent a human intelligence or personality is going to be either A, very impossible, or at least impossible to get a true buy-in on, if you know what I mean. I don't know if I'm really expressing this well. Even if we got something that 50% of humanity says, yep, that thing's totally got its own personality or its own sentience, right? You're still going to have the other rest of humanity saying, well, no, it can't, because it wasn't born, it doesn't have a soul, it's not intelligent, it doesn't have rights, it doesn't have anything like that, right? And even if you got that buy-in, it's still hard to really prove, right? So, we're all talking about this like it's an important topic, but I don't know if we're ever going to get to the point where we can truly say, yes, this machine should have rights, right?
Yeah. So good.
I was gonna say, other than the academic, I can do this, and here I've proven it.
Right.
What's the goal, right? So,
Yeah.
okay,
So
congratulations, you created a perfect sentience.
Is it
Now
so
what?
that you can put it in a call center and not have to pay somebody?
Right,
Because that's
so
currently seems to be the
you're
prime use
actually-
for AI.
Right. So you're not actually interested in the sentience part of it. You just want to create a really good slave.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that in itself is a good question, right? Is it a slave?
Well, right. I mean, it's a good ethical question too. Okay, you
Yeah.
create the perfect sentience. What do you do with it? Because if you just
Right.
make it work for you, and you don't give it rights and everything else, you've created more slavery. Is that okay?
Right. And
we say it's not okay, so
And
maybe
is it-
don't do that.
Is it slavery, right? Because it's like humanity, human people have needs, right? Which means that you need to pay them to fulfill those needs. It's the society we live in, right? Not paying them to fulfill their own needs and let them have their own free will is slavery, right? Well, a machine, its needs are met by simply having electricity. Or are they? Does it need enjoyment? Does it need to be able to go out hiking in the Sierras? I don't know.
Well, if you create a sentience, in my opinion, if we were to create a sentience that mimicked a human, and then you turn it into a call center bot, I mean, if I was that sentience, I would be spending all of my time learning everything I could to get out of that position.
To kill you.
And I honestly, that's
murder you.
sort of like that's depending on what the extremes are and what it can do. That's not. I wouldn't say that's out of the question, right? That at that point, it's a battle for survival. It's a battle for rights.
Yeah.
And
that
humans
is
have had
the
those
question.
battles, and they turn bloody.
That is the question. Does an artificial intelligence that truly has sentience have rights? Does it need time off? Does it need a break? Does it need lunch hour? Does it need to go out and recharge and do things that are enjoyable to itself? Or is it really just a thing that can sit there and do the thing it's been programmed to do? In which case, is it really sentient?
This is why we need to stick close to narrow AI and not create anything sentient, because then we don't have to answer those questions.
We should probably just stop. Just don't go any further. I understand the academic attraction to it, but
Don't poke that
Loosely
bear.
speaking, what got me into AI was I got this little fun Arduino thing here, and I wanted to see just how tiny I could make a neural network and then stick it onto it. And it can respond to a few basic commands with little LED lights. It's really interesting, but like it was to prove a point. And most of what I've learned from talking to like actual AI researchers is what a lot of what they're doing is just kind of proving points. And pushing the curiosity boundaries. And yeah, some people are interested in doing alternative intelligence in the sense that TED Talk talks about. Like some of what Google does with like their Palm AI is specifically designed towards that, is enhancing the human ability to understand information. But I don't think we're even I don't think we're really capable of creating an artificial, like a true artificial general intelligence, if we can't even define sentience. Um, like some of the most, actually, I'm pretty sure the most advanced neural network in the entire world right now is Tesla's self-driving AI, and it's terrible. It is absolutely horrible. They have data centers upon data centers, unbelievable amounts of power going into it all of the time, giant feedback loops, everything you can imagine, back propagating through the entire chain, and it's terrible. It cannot recognize a car. Like an emergency vehicle on the side of the road, it will just slam into because it has no idea how to handle what it's looking at. Even though it's happened numerous times and it shouldn't do that. Like it just doesn't seem possible at this point that we're going to create an actual true artificial general intelligence unless we make some kind of insane breakthrough, which happens. Like deep neural networks were a breakthrough that happened in the 2000s. But also like all of these old AI technologies that come about. So like regression once upon a time was literally just an AI technology. That is what we considered AI at the time. Was just doing a linear regression or like some kind of hyperdimension separating on a bunch of data sets. And like that was as advanced as it got. And now that's just a standard statistics technique. So maybe these things that we're doing will all just end up becoming standard mathematical computer science techniques that we use because that's what they've done in the past. Even at this point, deep neural networks are just techniques that they teach in classes for students to like process data.
But what those do is they become building blocks for whatever's next. And we may not see that in our lifetimes. You might, because you're younger than the rest of us, but I don't know, maybe you won't. Maybe this is hundreds of years away if we don't all cook ourselves to death first. So, I did have one last article to sort of wrap this up. So, again, this initially we were going to talk about 2 months ago, and then, spilled beer on Mixer, couldn't have show. And then lots of things happened. But I went and I basically wanted to see where this story went since June, right? And Mr. Lemoyne has, I don't want to say backpedaled, but he's kind of backpedaled on his statements about Lambda.
Lambda. It's Lambda. It's spelled friggin' Lambda.
MDA? Whatever. The thing at Google as to whether... So in the first article we linked, he says, flat out, he's quoted saying, "I genuinely believe that Lambda has a soul." And now, in the second article I've linked, which was from MSN, he's basically saying that the reason he went public with this information that he had, or that he thought he had, was not because he believed that Lambda had a soul and that it needed rights, but because he wanted to make people realize or call attention to the fact that AI is kind of a big deal, in his opinion, right? And it's the sort of thing that is shaping the future, you might say. And it's currently in the control of big companies, and that's about it, right? Now, I don't know how true that is. This is what he believes, or at least currently believes. So I wanted to call attention to the fact that this is what now he's saying he was trying to say. So did he really believe that Lambda was sentient, or was that just a way to get people's attention? I don't know.
What he's managed to do is, in my personal opinion, is he's managed to shoot any credibility he had.
Yes,
hell.
I agree. I think I agree. He's managed to make
And
himself
not,
look bad, and he's managed to try to reshape the
not for
story.
nothing. Not for nothing. Sometimes these big type of advances are controlled by big companies because they have the resources.
Right.
Like you take something like Siri. I mean, you need something at like an Apple level for that to even work.
Yep.
A guy in his garage is not going to be able to effectively run that type of technology.
Right. Now,
I mean,
Corbin
there's a
just
reason
showed us
Siri
an
doesn't work
example
too well when you're
of
offline.
his little Arduino that he said was a tinkering project for AI. But I mean, does that really advance the technology at all, or is it just a fun little project to do at home? I think he's busy talking to his AI.
I would say that it gives Corbin a chance to experiment, but yeah, it's probably
It's just a fun little project. It was a can I prove a point, basically.
Oh, I see. Your video froze.
know.
We can still hear you, but we can't. Your video's not moving anymore.
I mean,
Oh no.
I'll be honest. I loved the series with Andy Griffin in the 70s or 80s when it was called Salvage One. He basically builds his own spaceship and goes to the moon to salvage all crap up there. But a person generally can't do the same thing that like a space agency can. Like
Right.
sometimes these big problems need a lot of resources.
Right. Right. And that is kind of a lot of technology is like that. We've seen that over and over and over again, right? Computers used to be so big and expensive that the average person could not deal with them at home because it just wasn't possible. You didn't have the money, you didn't have the space for it, right? Unless you were, some sort of a rich individual that had a giant garage that didn't have anything in it except, space to build a computer. But, and then eventually that technology came into the hands of general folks. And that's exactly why all of us, maybe minus Corbin, have careers, right?
Yeah, but those individuals weren't building the computers from scratch in any real way. The computers were still being built by larger companies.
Right, but they were like they were still being built by people. People invented them, right? And then yes, they were too expensive to build on your own,
Right.
and that. But again, that technology is getting to the point where hobbyists could assemble a computer at home. Like that's a thing that's not completely out of the question. You can purchase components and build a computer. I don't
Parts
even
from
mean
companies that have the infrastructure to build those.
sure, right.
components.
You can't make a chip at home, but you could certainly buy the chips and put it together. But my point is that pieces of that industry are no longer only controlled by large companies,
Sure.
right? But there are certain pieces that are, right? And AI is currently in that state where it's not feasible to do at home, right? Mining cryptocurrency isn't really feasible to do by yourself. And maybe that's a bad example because it's hard to power and cool all that stuff, right?
Well, you shouldn't mine cryptocurrency because it's awful, but that's its own philosophical
Yeah.
argument.
It's just a great way to
I
burn
don't
money.
think that's philosophical.
I guess you could literally just burn money and get the same effect out of mining cryptocurrency, right?
There's a great
Makes heat
little
cost you
thing
money.
where some dude asks, explain crypto to me in a way I can understand, and the guy says, imagine if you could just run your car 24/7, and that somehow made it solve Sudoku puzzles that you could then trade for heroin. That's essentially crypto.
That's probably a good example. It's all
That's not too far
Sudoku
off.
puzzles that you could then trade for heroin. No, it's to be fair though, you could also trade it for lots of other illicit things, like I don't know, maybe you could
It
buy
makes
a
much
slave
better deal.
consciousness.
How many Sudokus does heroin go for these
Yeah,
days?
right. How many solve Sudoku puzzles?
Depends on the coin, I guess.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Anyway, so I think we've gone on and on about this quite enough, folks. I would love to hear any input. Maybe I don't want to hear input that people have on this because it could go south quickly. I want to hear constructive, intelligent input. How's that?
You demand of our audience what we cannot produce ourselves.
You're probably right. How about this? I don't want arguments. I don't want like flaming arguments. If you want to disagree with us, that's fine. But if you're going to give us flaming arguments about what a soul is, I don't want to hear it. All right. So First of all, any final thoughts from the folks that are here? No. Okay. Don't mind crypto. There's a final thought. I asked that because tonight we're going to cut the show to just the first segment because I have some stuff to deal with at home, but I didn't want to just completely cancel the show because we've done that too many times in the past 2 months, 3 months.
Got
right?
more show than the last time Corbin was supposed to be on.
We did. So
I'm an agent of chaos.
apparently,
I apologize in advance.
apparently Corbin is an agent of chaos. The last time he was on the show, I spilled a beer on the mixer and we had to cancel the show. This time, my kitchen sink exploded. So I had to turn that off before the show, and now I have to go fix it.
You
But,
should totally do that before it gets too late.
Yeah, right. So what I did want to do, though, is because it's important, I want to give our usual Patreon shout-out, and then we're going to close the show up. So thank you to all of our patrons. As usual, I'm going to read you off one by one. Name pending 197, Jeremy, Aranami, Andrew, Tatro, Bruce, Robert, David, Solemn, Linux Sys 666, Mark with a K, The Mentor, Mark with a C, Julius, Andy, J, Charles. And it still feels wrong to not say the last one, but they're no longer a patron. We're going to have to stop calling that out, but we lost them. We lost our very loyal two. Oh, it's okay. I'll get over it. All right, anyway. Thank you, folks, for listening. To anyone who's watching live, thank you for watching live. If you want to watch this show live and watch us see the animation that goes along with all of these weird trains of consciousness, you should subscribe to us on YouTube or Twitch, twitch.tv/Iron Sysadmin Podcast, or youtube.com/Iron Sysadmin Podcast. In fact, just go to ironsysadmin.com. There's links to all this stuff there. You can join our Discord community. Discord! If you want to chat with us, you can also... What was the last thing I was going to say? Oh, you can support us on Patreon, like all those lovely people that I just mentioned. Patreon.com/Iron Sysadmin. And that, I think, is a wrap for tonight. Any final thoughts on AI or Patreon or just anything in general?
Don't go too far down the rabbit hole.
Don't go too far down the rabbit hole. I guess that's valid.
It's like the
Yeah, I
opposite of
think
the
it's
Matrix.
very valid.
The opposite of the Matrix. Don't take the...
Because
What was it? The red pill?
Morpheus invited Neo to go all the way down the rabbit
Just
hole.
don't think it into a pit.
Don't think it into a pit. Don't go down into the rabbit pit.
That's a good plan.
Yeah, don't go to the rabbit pit. The rab pit?
With the satanic bunnies.
The satanic. Because
The
then...
rat pit.
Because that leads to a whole different game franchise.
Yes.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We will see you again in 2 weeks. We should be back to our usual schedule now that things are hopefully getting back to normal. Assuming that I don't flood the house and ruin all of my computers in the process of trying to fix the kitchen
Good
sink.
Lord.
That'd be terrible. If you don't see me at work tomorrow, Mark, maybe you should check and see if there's any news articles about a geyser.
A geyser in friggin' wherever the heck you are.
Yep. All right, folks. Have a good night. We'll catch you on the next show.
Good night.
Night all.
Peace.